Don't open that door. The words hit David Monroe like a slap sharp, sudden, and completely unexpected. He froze, his hand hovering an inch above the sleek biometric handle of his front door, still glowing faint blue from motion detection. His briefcase slid a little on his shoulder. The sun was beginning to dip behind the trees lining Lake Tahoe's west bank, casting long gold streaks across the stone steps of his sprawling glass and cedar estate. "Who said that?" he barked, spinning around. There she was standing at the edge of his driveway, a young black girl in a too-thin hoodie, her jeans fraying at the knees. Her eyes were wide with alarm, and she pointed a shaking finger toward the door he was just about to open. "Don't," she repeated, voice high and breathless. "Something's wrong. Someone messed with your house." David blinked, adrenaline already pushing into his chest. "Who are you? What do you mean messed with it?" Saw two people last night," she stammered, inching forward. "They were wearing dark clothes, and they came right up to your door. I was sleeping by the gate, behind the hedge. I saw them go to the control box. I heard a clicking sound." His gaze darted to the far wall of the entrance, where a concealed smart system panel controlled the home's lights, locks, and surveillance. A chill worked its way under his collar. "Clicking?" he repeated. "Did they go inside?" "I don't know," the girl said quickly. "I was too scared to move. I thought they saw me. But I think they did something. They were whispering about timing, and one of them had something with wires. Then they left fast." David's pulse quickened. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not in one of the most secure neighborhoods in Nevada. Not to him. The biometric entry was military grade. No keypad. No key. No way in unless someone knew exactly what they were doing. He stepped away from the door, heart pounding. "What's your name?" "Maya," she said. "Maya Williams." David pulled out his phone, fingers already dialing. 911. "My name is David Monroe. I'm at 1879 Pine Ridge. A child just informed me someone may have tampered with my home's security system, possibly with malicious intent. I need police and a technical response unit now." As he ended the call, his eyes returned to the girl. She was still standing awkwardly, as if unsure whether she should leave or stay. Her shoes, if you could call them, that were flattened sneakers with the soles flapping. Her small hands gripped the sleeves of her hoodie like she was bracing against wind that wasn't there. "Why would you tell me this?" he asked, the tension not yet leaving his voice. "Why would you risk stepping up to me like that?" Maya hesitated, then looked down at her feet. "Because it looked like a nice place, and I thought, maybe the person inside it didn't deserve to get hurt." David swallowed hard. 15 minutes later, the property was swarming with Tahoe's regional police department and a mobile cybersecurity unit. While officers secured the perimeter, 2 technicians approached the smart control panel Maya had pointed out. A third entered remote diagnostic codes through a portable terminal. One of them turned to David, his expression grim. "Sir, we found evidence of system tampering. Whoever did this knew what they were looking for. There's code injected into your mainframe, something meant to override the biometric lock at a specific time." David stiffened. "Would it have opened the door?" "No, sir," the man said. "It would have seemed like it opened, but it would have triggered an automated overload on the interior power grid. Best case scenario? It shorts everything and causes a fire. Worst case." He didn't finish. David let out a slow, shaky breath. Maya stood a few paces away, arms wrapped tightly around herself. She hadn't moved much since the police arrived, just watched everything unfold like a shadow that no one else really saw. David walked toward her. "You said you were sleeping by the gate?" She nodded. "How long have you been staying around here?" "Couple weeks," she said. "Since they kicked me out of the last shelter. Too full." He exhaled, then crouched down so he wasn't towering over her. "You didn't have to say anything," he murmured. "You could have let me open that door." Maya shrugged. "You looked like someone who'd want to know." He studied her face, smudged, alert, trying not to look scared. Then, as if remembering something, she reached into her hoodie and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Carefully, she offered it to him. It was a worn newspaper clipping. His face stared back at him from 4 years ago, young, smug, in a tuxedo at a fundraising gala for children's housing. A check the size of a surfboard stretched across his chest in the photo. "You kept this?" he asked quietly. "I was at that place," she said. "The one the check went to." And in that quiet exchange between a billionaire and a girl with nothing but hole-ridden shoes and a folded paperclip in her pocket, something changed. Not just a man's sense of safety, but his sense of purpose. If this moment touched you the way it touched us, leave a comment below. Tell us, do you believe that small acts of kindness can come full circle? Don't forget to like this story if Maya's courage moved you. And for more real and powerful moments like this, subscribe to our channel, because sometimes those who have the least give us the most. He looked at her for a long moment, not saying anything. Then, slowly, David Monroe stood and turned to one of the officers. Make sure she gets food, water, and medical care, and clean clothes, he said. Tonight. Maya's eyes widened slightly. You're not mad? David looked at her again. Really looked. You may have saved my life. And as the evening set in over Lake Tahoe, and the glow of squad car lights faded against the pines, David stood on the porch steps next to a girl with holes in her shoes and a headline in her pocket. He hadn't entered his house, but he had crossed a threshold all the same. The kitchen was too quiet, the kind of quiet that made David Monroe's nerves coil tighter with each step. He hadn't been back inside his house since the bomb techs disabled the power grid override and manually unlocked the main entrance. The team had swept every room, corner, and server port, but the unease clung to him like humidity. He stood now at the edge of the foyer, freshly showered but still in yesterday's clothes, staring at the blinking server rack tucked behind a mirrored wall in the hallway, his home's brain. A row of green lights pulsed rhythmically like a heartbeat. Beneath them, a single USB port was still pried open, marked with red forensic tape. They had accessed the system without tripping any external alarms. That wasn't just a break-in. It was a message, a warning dressed in ones and zeros. David's phone buzzed. He glanced down. Eli Jacobs, head of cybersecurity at Crosslight Systems. Talk to me, David said after answering. I'm pulling a team together now, Eli said. That kind of breach? It's surgical. Someone knew the architecture, possibly an internal blueprint. Not easy to guess. How long would it take to write something like this? David asked. A week if you're gifted, months if you're reckless. Whoever did this had helper training. Probably both. David's jaw clenched. Keep this off internal reports for now. I want to handle this personally. You sure? Eli's voice dipped. You've got a launch coming up in 4 weeks. I'm aware, David said, his voice cool. And I plan on being alive when it happens. He ended the call and looked toward the side hallway. From the guest room, a faint noise movement. Maya. She had showered. The water heater had groaned under years of disuse, and she'd quietly asked for just a few minutes before disappearing behind the bathroom door. He'd given her a soft towel and a too-big Crosslight hoodie from an old conference box. Now, she sat curled on the edge of the guest bed, one knee tucked up under her chin, watching a television with no sound. She looked better. Not safe, not settled, but better. He knocked gently on the open doorframe. She turned quickly, then relaxed when she saw it was him. I found cereal and milk, he said, and some of that microwave mac and cheese if you're brave. Her face cracked into something that looked like a smile. The orange kind? He nodded. The very orange kind. She stood slowly and followed him into the kitchen. The hardwood floor chilled under her thin socks. The island lights cast a warm glow over the polished countertops, untouched for days. David slid a bowl across the counter. She caught it with both hands, then spooned in cereal, her fingers twitching slightly. I haven't eaten here in maybe 2 days, she admitted. Before that, the shelter. Before the shelter. Nowhere, really. David leaned on the counter opposite her. You said you saw the men near the control box. Did you get a look at their faces? Maya shook her head. Too dark, and they kept whispering. One of them had a limp. The other kept checking something on his wrist. A watch, maybe. Or a timer. He took a mental note. Did they see you? I don't think so. I crawled into the hedge after they left and waited until the sun came up. You didn't think to go to the police? She stirred her cereal but didn't eat. They don't usually listen. David almost replied. Almost defended them. But he stopped. He wasn't sure they would have listened either, not to a girl like her, not with dirty socks and no address. He picked up his tablet, swiping through images from the bomb squad's report. A tampered breaker, a USB dongle with unknown firmware, The trigger code sat like a spider in the middle of the home system, waiting for a motion signal from the front door. He leaned against the counter again. "You saved me, and I don't know why. You don't owe me anything." Maya didn't look up. "You were kind to that place. Haven Hope. You gave a big check. There was music and food, and they let us pick a book from a table. I remember you smiling. I kept the picture." David felt a hollowness stir in his chest. That gala had been a PR response to a public scandal, something to quiet investors and clean the image. He barely remembered what he'd said on stage, let alone the faces of the kids. But she had remembered every word, every picture, every hope. "I haven't been back there since," he admitted. "I know," Maya said. "They closed it a year later, said the roof leaked and they didn't have funds to fix it." He pressed his fingers to his brow. "Jesus." Oh. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was tired. A kind of shared fatigue that needed no translation. Then Maya said something that made him pause. "I don't think they wanted to kill you." David looked up. "What?" "The men. I don't think it was about killing. I think it was about proving something. Making a point." "What kind of point?" "I heard one of them say, 'Let him open the door and finally understand.' That doesn't sound like a hit. That sounds like revenge." David stood fully now. "And they knew my security layout, the timing, the system." "Do you have enemies?" she asked. He gave a dry chuckle. "Plenty. Some of them I paid off. Some I forgot. And some I didn't even realize I'd hurt." She looked at him then, not with fear or admiration, but with something closer to recognition. A kid who'd seen the difference between a mistake and a pattern. "I'm going to need to look into this," he muttered. Maya's voice came quietly. "You already know who did it, don't you?" David met her eyes. He didn't respond. Not yet. But she wasn't wrong. He had a hunch, a name, a face. 3 years ago, a senior engineer named Malcolm Wynn had sued Crosslight Systems, accusing them of using his AI framework without credit or compensation. The court dismissed the case due to lack of conclusive authorship, and David had signed off on the legal defense with zero hesitation. Malcolm disappeared after the trialicence revoked, house foreclosed, wife filed for divorce. Last he heard, the man had moved somewhere upstate. David hadn't thought of him since. "Until now. I need to make a few calls," he said. "Will you be okay here?" Maya nodded. "You have orange mac and cheese. I'll survive." He gave a faint smile, turned, and walked toward his home office. But as he passed the hallway again, his eyes caught something, a smear on the edge of the server panel's mirrored surface. Not dust, not paint. It was a fingerprint. Fresh. He leaned closer, squinting. It wasn't his. He pulled out his phone and took a picture. Everything was more deliberate than he wanted to believe. This wasn't just sabotage. It was personal, and David Monroe was about to find out why. David sat at his glass-topped desk, a cup of untouched coffee cooling beside his laptop. Outside the window, the lake shimmered beneath early morning haze, but his eyes didn't register the beauty. They were locked on the screen, narrowed and dark, as his fingers moved across the keyboard. He'd been up since dawn. The fingerprint on the server panel had confirmed something he'd already suspected in his gut. This wasn't random. This was someone who knew his home, his systems, his blind spots. The security report had identified the print as partial but with enough ridge detail for a match. The Tahoe precinct ran it through their database and got a hit within minutes. Malcolm Wynn. David didn't flinch when the name came up. He just sat back in his chair, folded his hands together, and stared at the face staring back at him from the screen. A younger Malcolm from his company's old staff ID system before the lawsuit, before the collapse. His eyes had that spark David remembered. A little too intense. Brilliant, yes, but impulsive. They'd once stood side by side in boardrooms, pitching their early AI model to skeptical investors. Now, the man was a ghost resurfacing through code and copper wiring. David's stomach tightened. He tapped a key and opened a private file. A note he'd made 3 years ago during the settlement review process. Malcolm had demanded recognition and retroactive equity. David, advised by legal counsel, had refused. Not out of spite, but because Malcolm had signed an NDA, and the project had advanced far beyond his initial framework, or at least, that was the justification at the time. David remembered signing the rejection notice without a second thought. He also remembered Malcolm's face when security escorted him out of the building. "I gave you everything," he'd said, just loud enough to echo down the marble hallway. "And you left me with nothing." Now, years later, it seemed Malcolm hadn't forgotten. David rose from his desk and moved toward the living room, where Maya sat cross-legged on the floor, fiddling with a Rubik's Cube he'd left on the coffee table. She was still wearing the oversized hoodie, the sleeves bunching around her wrists. Her face lit up when she saw him enter, but her smile faded quickly when she read his expression. "You found something," she said. He nodded. "It was someone I used to know, a man named Malcolm Wynn. He worked with me a long time ago. Did you hurt him?" The question was simple, direct, no judgment, just the kind of clarity only children dared to use. David didn't answer right away. He walked past her to the glass doors, staring out at the lake. "I didn't mean to," he finally said. "But maybe that doesn't matter." Maya turned the Rubik's Cube in her hands, the colors clicking as she shifted each row. "Sometimes people get hurt even when no one meant to." David turned back. "You talk like someone twice your age." "I listen a lot," she replied. "It helps when no one sees you." He gave a half smile. Then his phone buzzed again. It was Eli. "I've got something," Eli said. "We traced the code used in your system. A custom signature embedded deep in the override stringets, similar to the AI backbone Malcolm wrote for our early neural net prototype." David's fingers curled around the edge of the kitchen island. "So he used his own design," he muttered. "Yes. And get this, he accessed your system through an external node, a custom relay device, not just a USB. It was acting as a repeater, embedded behind your mainframe, meaning he was planning to monitor it remotely." "Exactly. But the signal cut off around 3:14 a.m. Someone killed it." David's eyes flicked to Maya. She noticed. "What? You said they left just before dawn." She nodded. "I think one of them dropped something. I heard a clink, but they didn't go back for it." David grabbed his jacket. "Show me." They stepped into the early morning chill, dew clinging to the grass beneath their feet. Maya led him around the side of the house, past the cedar-lined wall and down into the mulch bed beneath the security panel. "There," she said, pointing behind a hedge. David crouched. Half buried in the soil and bark was a small, rectangular object, no bigger than a deck of cards. Its black casing had a hairline crack, and the corner was smeared with dirt. Carefully, he picked it up with a tissue. It was warm, not from the sun but from recent use. He looked at Maya. "You sure they didn't see you?" She nodded. "I ducked down. I heard one of them curse. He was limping, angry, said something about not enough time." David turned the device over. This thing was relaying everything in real time. They were watching the house. He pulled out his phone and called Eli. "I've got a physical relay device," he said. "Bring your tools. I want to know everything it saw." Back inside, he placed the device on the counter and glanced at Maya. "You've helped me more than most people ever have, and I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," she said quietly. "But I have a question." "Anything. Why did that man hate you so much?" David leaned against the marble island. "Because I built a life out of something we both helped create, and when it became valuable, I took the credit." Maya considered that for a moment. "Did you feel bad?" "Not at first," he admitted. "I told myself he signed papers, gave up his rights, that it was legal, that it wasn't personal. But now?" David looked away. "Now I'm starting to realize that doing things legally doesn't always mean doing them right." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Maya shifted forward. "I think you should talk to him." David turned back. "Malcolm?" She nodded. "He's angry. But people don't risk this much just for anger. He wants you to see something." David frowned. "See what?" "I don't know," she said softly. "But maybe it's bigger than just you and him." He rubbed his forehead. Her words lingered. Then his phone buzzed again. A text. From Eli. Tracked the device. Last ping came from a remote warehouse in Carson City. GPS coordinates sent. "You might want to see this for yourself." David stared at the message, then back at Maya. "Pack your coat," he said. "We're going on a drive." She blinked. "Wait, I'm coming? You're the one who found them. Besides," he added with a wry smile, "you're better company than most of the executives I know." Her grin returned. It was small, but this time it reached her eyes. As they pulled out of the driveway minutes later, David glanced at the passenger seat at the girl with the oversized hoodie, the yellow hat now neatly folded in her lap, and eyes sharper than most analysts he'd ever hired. He didn't know what they'd find in Carson City, but for the first time in years, he wasn't driving alone. And that made all the difference. The sun had barely lifted past the ridge of the Sierra Nevada when David Monroe's black SUV turned off the main highway onto a side road lined with gravel and rust. Carson City's industrial district stretched before the mold, forgotten warehouses from the railway era, most of them boarded up, their windows either smashed or painted over in a lazy coat of gray. David checked the GPS one more time. The pin led to a long, rectangular structure near the rail yard, partially hidden behind a line of freight containers. It looked abandoned, no signage, no activity. But as he slowed the vehicle and cut the engine, he noticed faint tire tracks on the dirt. Fresh. Maya leaned forward in the passenger seat, squinting. "This is where they were?" David nodded, slipping the car into park. Last signal from the relay device came from inside this building. If Malcolm was watching me, he did it from here. Maya didn't say anything. She hugged her hoodie tighter around her frame. The morning was brisk, the kind that cut through you with still air instead of wind. David stepped out and scanned the area. No cameras, no guards, just pigeons fluttering near the rusted rooftop. "Stay close," he said, opening her door. "And if I tell you to run, you run. Got it?" She gave a sharp nod and climbed out beside him. The gravel crunched beneath their feet as they approached the building. David reached the door first, a thick metal roll-up gate with a padlock. It was new, too new for a place like this. The shiny steel stood out like a fresh scar. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a slim tool he kept in the glove compartment, an old habit from his startup days. He jimmied the lock quickly, efficiently. Within seconds, it popped open. The gate groaned as he lifted it slowly. Inside, the warehouse was cavernous and cold. Long shafts of morning light pierced through holes in the ceiling, illuminating floating dust. Stacks of unused crates, rusted shelving units, and coiled wires lined the walls. But at the far end of the space beneath, a hanging industrial lamp, a folding table had been set up. A laptop, a cracked monitor, several black cables snaking to a power source rigged to a battery pack. Maya whispered, "This doesn't look abandoned to me." David motioned for her to stay by the entrance as he moved forward. He reached the table cautiously, eyes scanning every corner. On the floor nearby, he spotted an energy drink can half full-end, a foil wrapper from a sandwich shop. Someone had been here recently. He powered on the monitor. Static. Then a screen flickered to life. No password, no encryption. A single folder sat on the desktop, labeled in all caps, Monroe Truth. David clicked it open. What filled the screen made his stomach turn. Photos, dozens of them. Images from surveillance footage, his front gate, his office lobby, his car parked at the valet. But more than that, documents, contracts, signed NDAs, screenshots from internal email chains. One in particular caught his attention. Win prototype integration. His name at the bottom. A forwarded email chain where he'd dismissed Malcolm's contributions as conceptual only, recommending full credit be assigned to internal teams. His own words: cold, efficient, legally sound, morally empty. He scrolled further. There were interview clips too, video recordings. A thumbnail caught his eye: Malcolm, sitting in what looked like this very warehouse, speaking directly to the camera. David clicked play. 3 years ago, Malcolm's voice echoed through tinny speakers. "I tried to do things the right way. I gave Crosslight my ideas, my framework, my late nights. I signed the contracts. I thought David Monroe would honor that." He leaned forward in the video, eyes heavy, face thinner than David remembered. "But I learned quickly David doesn't remember the people who build the road under his empire. He only sees what's ahead, and if someone stumbles behind him, he doesn't turn around. He steps harder." David stared, silent. Maya came up behind him, watching over his shoulder. Malcolm's voice continued, quieter now. "I'm not trying to ruin him. I just want him to see what it costs to build what he calls success. I want him to feel what it's like to be invisible." The video ended. David closed the file. then stared at the laptop for a long moment. It wasn't anger that flooded him. It was something heavier, something slower. Guilt, yes, but also a dawning awareness of how far he'd traveled from the person he once meant to be. He turned to Maya. He doesn't want to kill me. He wants me to see myself. She nodded slowly. And now you have. Suddenly, the warehouse filled with the echo of footsteps fast, coming from the opposite entrance. David reacted instantly. He grabbed Maya's hand and pulled her behind a nearby crate, crouching low. A figure appeared at the far end of the space, silhouetted in the light from a newly opened side door. Male, tall, limping slightly. Malcolm. He didn't carry a weapon, just a duffel bag. He moved cautiously, looking around, then walked toward the table. He froze when he saw the open laptop. David stepped out from behind the crate. Malcolm startled, dropping the bag. His eyes widened when he saw who it was. David? You came back, David said quietly. Why? Malcolm stared, chest heaving. To see if you'd seen it. The truth. David stepped forward, hands open. I saw it. Every line. They stood in silence for a long beat. I didn't come here to fight, David continued. And I didn't come here with police. Just her. He motioned to Maya, who slowly stepped out beside him. Malcolm looked at her, his expression softening. You're the one who warned him. She nodded. I saw what you did to the house. He nodded, almost respectfully. I didn't want it to blow. Just enough to trigger a scare. Just enough to wake him up. You could have hurt someone, David said, voice low. That wasn't justice. That was desperation. Malcolm's face cracked. And what do you think pushed me there? David didn't answer. He couldn't. Then Maya stepped forward. I think you both forgot how to listen, she said. One of you got too high. The other fell too far. And now you're shouting at different ends of a canyon. Both men turned to her, the air between them suspended. David finally spoke. What do you want, Malcolm? I want what you took, he said. Not the money, not even the credit. Just acknowledgement that I mattered. David's throat tightened. I don't have a speech prepared, he said. But I can tell you this, I was wrong. I was busy chasing something I thought would make me whole. And I never turned around to see who I left bleeding. Malcolm didn't respond at first. Then he bent down, zipped up his bag, and slung it over his shoulder. I don't need an apology for me, he muttered. I just need to know you'll change how you lead, how you build. I will, David said, steady now. And it starts with her. He looked down at Maya, who stared back with wide, steady eyes. Malcolm nodded once, then turned and walked out the way he came. David stood there for a long time after the echo of footsteps faded. Then he picked up the laptop, closed the lid, and turned to Maya. We're going home, he said. As they drove back toward Lake Tahoe, Maya curled up in the passenger seat, her head against the window, her breath steady. David glanced at her, then back at the road ahead. He didn't have all the answers, but he finally knew the right questions to ask. The house felt different, not because it had changed, no walls had been torn down, no furniture moved, but because David Monroe walked through it with a different weight in his chest. It was a little after 9 p.m. when he and Maya returned from Carson City. The sky was dark above the lake, stars reflecting faintly in the water, and the wind was unusually still, as though the world was holding its breath with him. Maya walked quietly beside him as they entered the house. She'd slept most of the ride back, her head against the window, arms curled around the yellow hat now permanently clutched like a relic of safety. Her silence wasn't cold, it was thoughtful. David locked the door behind them, instinctively checking the entry panel, the same one that had nearly been his grave. Its lights glowed steady green now, rebooted, clean. But nothing would feel clean for a while. I put clean towels in the bathroom, he said gently, as they moved toward the hallway. And there's leftover pasta in the fridge if you're hungry. Maya didn't respond right away. She just looked up at him with a question buried in her eyes. Then she finally spoke. You didn't call the police on him. David paused. Number. Why not? He exhaled. Because sometimes people break things when they've been broken too long. Doesn't mean they're beyond repair. She nodded slowly. Is that why you're helping me? He looked at her, really looked. Number? I'm helping you because I should have a long time ago, even if I didn't know it yet. She didn't answer, but her shoulders relaxed. He watched as she padded toward the guest room, that too large hoodie trailing behind her. The door closed softly. A few seconds later, a narrow strip of light appeared under the bottom. David turned off the rest of the house lights and stepped into his office. He needed to think, but more than Thaith needed to act. He sat at his desk and opened his laptop, pulling up the archived employee records from the last 5 years. He filtered by project, Neural Net 3.1. Malcolm Wynn was listed, of course, but so were others. Engineers, interns, developers. Some had left quietly, some with lawsuits, a few with nervous breakdowns. The deeper he scrolled, the more patterns he saw. Rejected promotions, delayed bonuses, projects reassigned without proper credit. On paper, everything looked defensible standard procedure in a growing tech firm. But looking at it now, all David saw were shadows of himself. A man so focused on the climb that he left bruises on every rung beneath him. He shut the laptop. This wasn't a legal problem anymore. It was a human one. He stood and walked to the kitchen. The air smelled faintly of garlic and tomathy scent from the sauce he'd reheated for Maya. He noticed the bowl was empty in the sink, rinsed. She hadn't said anything, but she'd eaten. That felt like something. Then the doorbell rang. It was close to 10 now. David froze. No one just dropped by his house unannounced us, especially not since the attempted sabotage. He moved cautiously to the front door and checked the security camera on his phone. A woman stood on the porch. Late 40s, black blazer, thin-rimmed glasses, a face he recognized but hadn't seen in years. Elaine Carter, former head of HR. She'd left Crosslight 2 years ago after a quiet disagreement with David's board over transparency policy. He opened the door. "Elaine?" She gave a polite nod. "Sorry to show up like this. I called your assistant, but she said you've been out of reach." "I have," he said. "Come in." She stepped inside, arms crossed over a leather portfolio. Her posture was stiff, but her eyes were clear-focused. "I heard about the break-in," she said, "and I also heard you visited Carson City this morning." David raised an eyebrow. "You still have friends on the inside." "I have friends who care about the company," she corrected, "and about the people who built it." He gestured toward the kitchen. "You want coffee?" "No, thank you. I won't stay long." She opened the folder and placed a series of documents on the counter. "These are names, former employees. Some you remember, most you don't. I've been tracking their stories since I left. What happened to them after Crosslight?" David glanced down names, dates, brief notes. One had gone into bankruptcy. Another was working gig jobs despite a PhD. One had overdosed last winter. "You've been keeping tabs?" he asked. Elaine nodded. "Because someone had to. We built a company on brilliance, David. But we buried a lot of it under ego, speed, and silence." "I know," he said quietly. "I believe you do now. That's why I came." He looked up. "I want to help you make this right," she continued. "You still have the platform, the reach. If you're really going to change how you lead, how you rebuild, it needs to start with them." David considered the weight of her words. He thought of Malcolm's video, Maya's questions, his own face in that gala photo Maya kept in her pocket like it meant something. "I want to bring them back," he said. Elaine tilted her head. "Bring who back?" "The forgotten ones. I want to find them. Not to apologize, not just to say sorry, but to listen, to ask what they need now, what they could build if someone just believed in them again." Her eyes softened. "Then I'll help." They stood there a moment, the unspoken history between them settling into something more useful. She gathered her papers. "I'll get in touch with those I can find. You'll have something in your inbox by morning." David nodded. "And Elaine, thank you." For what?" "For still believing something good could come from all this." She gave a half smile. "I never stopped." After she left, David sat at the island for a while. The house was quiet again. The kind of quiet that didn't feel hollow anymore. It felt open. He turned toward the hallway, saw the guest room door still closed, the light still faint under it. Then, as if on cue, it opened. Maya stepped out, her expression cautious. "Did something happen?" she asked. David smiled gently. "Something good, I think." She nodded. "I couldn't sleep." "Me neither." They walked to the back porch together. The night air was cool, and the lake shimmered under moonlight. They sat on the steps in silence for a few minutes before Maya spoke again. "Do you think he'll come back?" "Malcolm?" David asked. I don't know. But if he does, would you listen this time? David looked at her, then out at the still water. I think I already started. Ugh. She leaned her head against his arm, small and warm and steady. And in that quiet moment, with no cameras, no contracts, no billion-dollar valuations, just two people, and the weight of redemption between them, David Monroe realized the guest room light wasn't the only thing still on in his house. His heart was, too. For the first time in years, at 6:12 a.m., David Monroe was already awake, seated on the edge of his bed, holding a steaming cup of coffee that had long gone lukewarm. He hadn't slept much again, but it wasn't restlessness in the same way it had been before. It wasn't fear of the door or what lay behind it. This time, it was motion. Forward motion. Something inside him had cracked open the night before, maybe when Elaine handed him that list. Maybe when Maya leaned her head against his arm and watched the lake like it was teaching her something. He walked barefoot into his office and turned on the overhead lights. The folder Elaine had left sat open on his desk, the contents fanned out as though the names might rearrange themselves into a path forward. He tapped on his laptop and opened a blank document. A letter. No lawyers. No press team. Just him. To all of you who built this company, some of whom I've never met, and some of whom I should have listened to, I owe you something. Not just an apology, but my full attention now. The kind I should have given you then. You had ideas I minimized, effort I failed to acknowledge, and lives that were affected by the decisions I made in silence. I don't expect forgiveness. I only ask for a conversation. I am rebuilding, and I hope some of you might help me do it right this time. He sat back, staring at the words. Then, without fanfare, he pressed save. The house was quiet, but the light under Maya's door was already glowing. She was up. By the time he walked into the kitchen, she was sitting at the table in his hoodie, legs crossed, flipping through a book she must have found on the shelf in the den. He hadn't even known it was there. It was an old biography, The Men Who Built the Sky, Early Tech Founders of Silicon Valley. David raised an eyebrow. That's some heavy reading for this early. Maya grinned slightly. It was next to a cereal box. I was bored. You want breakfast? She nodded. While he scrambled eggs and browned toast, she looked over the counter. You really writing to them? He didn't ask who she meant. Yes. Every single person Elaine can track down. I'm not offering money. I'm offering space, voice, the option to be heard. Some won't write back. I know. Some will want more than you're willing to give. I know that too. She shrugged. Still worth it. They ate in near silence, broken only by clinks of silverware and the soft rhythm of the lake wind knocking a wind chime on the porch. As he rinsed the dishes, Maya asked, Do you think you're going to hire some of them again? I hope so. Even Malcolm? He paused, then turned to look at her. Especially Malcolm. She nodded, then stood and wiped her hands on a paper towel. Good. 'Cause he was the smart kind of mad. Not the destroy, everything kind. Just the listen to me or someone's gonna get hurt kind. David thought about that. Then his phone vibrated. A message. From Elaine. You should see this. Attached was a link. He clicked it. It was a video. Malcolm. Not one of the surveillance recordings. This was new. Fresh. He was seated at a small table in what looked like a motel room. Behind him, a lamp with a crooked shade. He spoke directly to the camera. If you're watching this, then either I'm in jail or you listened, he began. I made a copy of everything, but not to blackmail. I made it so anyone could understand the cost of being overlooked. I worked on the core AI framework that built Crosslight's early success. I signed papers, yes, but I never signed away my humanity. You can't patent that. He paused, eyes flickering. I'm not the enemy, and I never wanted to be. But you can only knock on a door so long before you have to decide whether to wait or burn it down. David sat down slowly, the screen casting shadows across his face. Malcolm's voice softened. If you really want to change, don't send me flowers. Don't write me a check. Rebuild the door, and let someone else open it next time. The video ended. Maya was at his side. He's still watching. Maybe, David said. Maybe he just wants me to know he's not gone. Just waiting to see if I mean what I say. He closed the phone. At noon, Elaine returned with a printed list. A few dozen names, email addresses, 2 phone numbers. I've made initial contact, she said. 5 are willing to speak on the record. 3 want to meet in person. David studied the sheet. One name stood out. Raphael King. Former junior developer. Quiet. Brilliant. Left 6 months before Malcolm's lawsuit. No fanfare. Just vanished. He's one of them? David asked. He's the only one who didn't reply with anger, Elaine said. He replied with a single line. I'll come, but I'm not coming alone. David furrowed his brow. Who's he bringing? He didn't say. 2 days later, they arrived. Raphael stepped out of a beat-up blue sedan in front of David's estate, and beside him was Malcolm Wynne. Maya was on the porch, watching silently. David met them halfway down the stone path. Neither man smiled, but neither man looked hostile. I thought you might show up, David said to Malcolm. You wrote something honest. I figured that's worth the drive, Malcolm replied. Raphael extended a hand. This time, we start at the same table. They walked inside. The air was thick with something more than tension. It was history unspoken, unhealed, and waiting. In the dining room, David gestured to the seats. They sat. Maya brought in glasses of water without being asked. Malcolm glanced at her. She's the one who? David nodded. She's the reason I'm still here. Maya folded her arms. He's not lying, I yelled at him, loud. Malcolm laughed for the first time. Just a breath. Then David opened the folder in front of him. No NDAs. No conditions. Just plans. To build something different. And the first version starts with your names in the credits. Malcolm's jaw tensed. Say that again. David looked him in the eye. You built the foundation. I ignored that. I won't anymore. Raphael leaned back, nodding. Then maybe it's not too late. That night, David stepped outside again. The porch was warm under his feet. Maya sat beside him with a mug of cocoa and her book. Did they agree? She asked. Yes. They gonna work with you again? Maybe. Maybe not all of them. But they don't want to destroy me anymore. That's a start. Maya tilted her head. You ever think maybe? You were the one who needed saving? David looked at her, the girl who had shouted from the sidewalk and refused to look away. I know I was, he said. And as the wind moved softly through the pines, the house behind them glowing gently with life and conversation, David Monroe realized the letter he'd written wasn't the end of the story. It was the first page of something new. A week passed. It was a quiet kind of week, but not the kind David Monroe had grown used to. No polished meetings in glass towers, no glossy boardrooms, no tech jargon flung like confetti over espresso-fueled brainstorming. Instead, the week unfolded in long conversations, shared silences, and the sound of small, necessary repairs both in the house and in the hearts of those now beginning to step back into his orbit. Malcolm returned twice. The second time, he stayed longer. He and Raphael had spent 3 afternoons in David's home office, sketching diagrams on whiteboards, pulling up old prototype files, and talking through what had gone wrong in the earliest versions of Crosslight's architecture, not just in the code, but in the people. Trust had been the first thing to break, and now they were trying to write that back into the DNA of the next chapter. Maya watched it all like a quiet witness. She often sat on the edge of the hallway just outside the office, knees tucked under her, flipping through books she never finished but always seemed to understand. She didn't interrupt, but her presence was a thread that wove through every day. Through the mornings she insisted on making scrambled eggs for them all. Through the evenings she played quiet jazz on the old record player David hadn't touched in years. And then came Thursday morning. David was in the backyard, pruning a row of small dogwoods he'd barely noticed since moving in. The lake was calm, sun slicing through mist in long golden beams. The air held that crispness of early fall, the kind of sharp that wakes you up without needing a second cup of coffee. Elaine arrived around 9. She came not with another list or another warning, but with a small black envelope tucked under her arm and a look on her face that told David to brace himself. He met her on the porch. I've been calling former staff, she said. Most have been wary, some cautious, a few are curious, but one sent something back I think you need to see. She handed him the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. It was handwritten in neat cursive. David, you probably don't remember me. We spoke maybe once, during a holiday mixer. I was the software QA lead. I found a flaw in your AI architecture 6 months before the launch. My report was shelved. My supervisor said it would delay rollout. I was dismissed 5 weeks later. The bug I found still exists. It hasn't been weaponized yet, but it could be. This isn't blackmail. I don't want to check. I want you to fix it, quietly, without headlines, without making it about redemption. Below are the coordinates to an encrypted file. The flaw is explained there. You'll recognize the code. LS. David read the note 3 times before lowering it. His fingers were cold despite the sun. Do we know who LS is? He asked. Elaine nodded. Lena Strauss. She worked in Seattle. Left quietly. No lawsuits. No angry posts. Just disappeared. He remembered her vaguely quiet, methodical, always on time. Never complained. The kind of employee people assumed would always be there until one day she wasn't. Is the threat real? I don't know, Elaine said, but I think you believe it is. He nodded. Thank you. After she left, he sat at the kitchen table, Maya beside him with her elbows resting on the counter, drawing figures in the condensation on her water glass. Another problem, she asked. He didn't speak for a moment. There's a flaw in my system, he finally said. A real one. And if someone else finds it before I fix it, people could get hurt. Badly. Her brow furrowed. Like how bad? Bad enough to cause panic, financial crashes, misfired responses in security platforms, AI used for harm instead of help. She looked at him, wide-eyed but not afraid. Then you fix it, before someone else does something worse. David gave a tight nod. I'm going to need help. Again, that evening, Raphael and Malcolm returned. They ate pasta on the porch as Maya read snippets from a newspaper she'd found on the steps. It was the first time in a while David felt something close to family, not bound by blood, but by necessity, by choice. I need both of you, he said. There's a vulnerability buried in one of our oldest frameworks. It slipped through QA. I ignored the voices that tried to raise it, and now I'm asking you to help me undo what I let happen. Malcolm leaned back. You're asking us to fix the flaw you built. No, David said. I'm asking you to help me fix the culture that buried it. Raphael tilted his head. What about the board? What about investors? They'll learn, David said. Once we secure the patch, I'll make it public. Full transparency. If it costs me my title, so be it. Malcolm nodded slowly. Then let's get to work. For the next 4 days, they operated out of David's living room. The office was too small now. Code scrolled across massive monitors. Diagrams were taped to the windows. Whiteboards leaned against bookshelves. Coffee mugs stacked in 2s and 3s. Maya floated between them, sometimes reading aloud error messages, sometimes curling up on the couch listening to Malcolm explain how recursive loops could turn into logical sinkholes. She didn't understand all the math, but she understood the stakes. She knew what it meant to see something broken and try to make it whole again. On the 5th night, at 2:37 a.m., Raphael hit enter on the last line of code. The system blinked, ran diagnostics, and returned a single word. Stable. They didn't cheer. They just stared. David exhaled slowly. We got it. Malcolm leaned back, rubbing his eyes. That bug, it was deeper than I thought, built into the very logic layers. No wonder it sat quiet all these years. Raphael stood and stretched. I'll write the audit. Every line we touched, every correction. David nodded. And I'll call a press conference. This isn't going to be a quiet fix. Malcolm raised an eyebrow. You're going public with it? Yes, David said. We don't get to be the good guys in silence. Not this time. At sunrise, he stood at the edge of his backyard, the lake bathed in lavender and pink. Maya came out with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. You look tired, she said. I feel lighter, he replied. She sat next to him on the wooden bench. You're not the same man who almost opened that door. No, David said quietly. I don't think I am. She smiled, leaning into his shoulder. Good, she said. I like this one better. And as the sun climbed into the sky, David Monroe understood something simple. Redemption isn't about grand gestures. It's about small choices, repeated. Listening when you'd rather speak, staying when you could walk away, and rebuilding line by line, name by name the very thing you once helped break. The morning of the press conference began not with chaos, but with quiet. a rare kind of stillness that seemed to coat the entire estate in anticipation. David Monroe stood in front of the full-length mirror in his room, adjusting the cuffs of a simple navy suit. No tie, no designer pin, no crosslight branding, just him, unarmored. He had written the statement himself. Every line, no PR edits, no legal filters, just truth structured but raw, and unapologetically his. Maya appeared in the doorway behind him, barefoot in her usual oversized hoodie, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of cocoa. She leaned against the frame and studied him for a moment. "You look like someone about to tell the world a secret," she said. David gave a soft smile. "I am. You nervous?" "Yes." She took a sip, then shrugged. "Good. That means it's probably worth saying." Downstairs, the living room had been transformed. A local media crew had arrived at dawn to set up. Cameras were positioned just outside the glass doors, pointed inward toward a long wooden table where David would sit. A handful of journalists had been granted access, those known for their integrity, not their sensationalism. Elaine coordinated everything with her usual calm, moving between reporters and cables with quiet authority. Malcolm and Raphael stood off to the side, reviewing documents on a tablet. They weren't here to speak, but their presence was non-negotiable. They had earned the right to witness what was about to unfold. At 10 a.m. sharp, the lights shifted. David stepped forward. The cameras clicked on. Reporters readied their recorders. The room held its breath. He sat, placed both hands flat on the table, and looked directly into the lens. "My name is David Monroe," he began, voice steady. "And for the last decade, I have led Crosslight Systems, a company built on the promise of innovation, of progress. But behind every promise, there are people. And behind every success, there are stories that don't get told." He paused, letting the words settle. 3 weeks ago, an attempted act of sabotage at my home forced me to confront something I've ignored for too long: the quiet harm caused by the systems we build, and the silence we allow to surround them. He outlined the vulnerability, what it was, how long it had gone unnoticed, how it had been discovered not by his executive team, but by a former employee who had once been dismissed for asking too many questions. "I want to make something clear," David continued. "This isn't a confession of guilt for a single oversight. It's an admission that a culture I helped shape valued speed over safety, ego over collaboration, and silence over truth." He took a breath. "In the past 2 weeks, I have worked closely with the individuals who first raised concerns people I once overlooked. Together, we have not only patched the vulnerability, but built a new protocol for transparency, oversight, and collaborative authorship within the company." He paused, then glanced briefly to his right, where Malcolm and Raphael stood just outside the camera's frame. "They are the architects of the future we should have started years ago." There was a flicker of movement in the audience, reporters jotting notes, exchanging glances. David leaned forward. "I'm not resigning. Not because I believe I deserve to stay, but because I believe I can do more good now by staying than by stepping aside. That may change. I welcome accountability. From the board, from my team, and from the public." He softened then. "There is a girl. Her name is Maya. She's 10. And 3 weeks ago, she stood at my front gate and screamed for me not to open a door because someone had tampered with it. She saved my life. She didn't know me. She owed me nothing. But she acted, loudly, bravely." David's throat tightened, just for a moment. "We live in a world where people like her are often ignored, overlooked, treated as noise instead of signal. I will never make that mistake again." The statement ended not with applause, but with a long, powerful silence. The reporters didn't shout questions immediately. A few just sat there, still processing. And in that stillness, David saw something that looked a lot like respect. Afterward, he stepped off camera and walked out to the porch where Maya sat on the swing, legs kicking gently back and forth. She didn't look up when he joined her. "Did you tell them about me?" she asked. "I did." And about the bug?" "Yes." "And about the people you forgot?" "All of it." She finally turned to him. "Did it feel like the truth?" He nodded. "It felt like more than truth. It felt like the beginning." She smiled. "Then it's not just a press conference. It's a page turn." That night, a clip of the conference aired on every major news network. It was shared, dissected, debated. Some called it damage control. Some called it revolutionary, but most agreed on one thing: they hadn't seen a CEO speak like that in a very long time. Emails poured in. Hundreds. Some angry, some grateful, some from people David hadn't spoken to in a decade. One caught his eye. It was from Lena Strauss. "David, I saw your statement. You didn't have to name me, but you did. If you mean what you said, I'd like to talk. L.S." He sat back, fingers hovering over the keys. Then he typed, "Let's meet. Your time. Your terms. I'll listen." The reply came almost instantly. "Tomorrow, noon. The park off Claymore Street. I'll bring coffee. You bring a chair." The next day, David arrived 10 minutes early. The park was small, tucked between a library and a community center. A single oak tree shaded a quiet bench. Lena was already there. She wore a gray beanie, worn jeans, and a windbreaker. Her posture was relaxed, but her eyes were sharp. He sat. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said. "I wasn't sure you'd ask." She handed him a coffee. They talked for an hour. She told him about the moments she saw the culture break from the inside, when junior staff stopped asking questions, when meetings became monologues, when the algorithm started steering the ship instead of people. He didn't defend himself. He listened. And when she finished, he said, "Help me build it again, from the inside this time, with guardrails, with dissent, with your name on it." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once. "I'll think about it." That evening, as David returned to his house, he found Maya asleep on the couch, a book open on her chest. The living room lights were low, and the scent of grilled cheese lingered in the air. He gently draped a blanket over her, then sat nearby, watching the rise and fall of her breath. The door she once shouted at him not to open, he understood now. It hadn't just been a physical threat. It had been symbolic. It had been every decision, every moment of arrogance, every time he refused to see beyond the surface. But now the door was open, and behind it was light, life, and the chance to finally do something that would outlast him. Not for headlines, not for redemption, but for a girl who believed in warning someone she didn't even know, and for all the others still waiting for someone to listen. The sound of Maya's footsteps echoed down the hallway, softer now, more familiar. She moved like someone who belonged, not like a guest, not like a visitor, but like someone who had planted roots in a house that used to echo with absence. It had been 3 weeks since the press conference, 3 weeks since David Monroe told the world the truth. Since then, things hadn't gotten easier, but they had become clearer. That morning, David stood in what had once been a storage room off the west wing of the house. Floor-to-ceiling shelves had been cleared, dust wiped away. A fresh coat of matte white paint covered the walls. On the far side, under soft museum-style lighting, a wooden table stood with a small glass case at its center. Inside the case sat a single folded piece of yellowing newsprint. It was Maya's clipping, the one she had carried in her hoodie pocket, the one with his photo from a long-forgotten charity gala, smiling with a giant check in his hand. He'd asked her twice if she wanted to keep it. She had shaken her head both times. "You keep it," she'd said. "It means more to you now than it does to me." And she was right. That old article was the seed of everything. The moment a girl with nothing chose to believe that a man with everything might still be worth saving. Now, the room around it was being built to house the rest. David called it the legacy room, but not for his legacy, for theirs. Behind him, Raphael unpacked a box of frames. Inside were photos of former employees: Malcolm in the early prototype lab, Lena in a conference presentation, Raphael himself at an all-hands meeting 6 years ago, smiling like a man who still believed in what he was building. "This one," Raphael said, holding up a faded Polaroid of a young QA intern laughing beside a computer tower. "She wrote to say she couldn't believe she was being remembered, that someone found her photo and asked if she wanted to be part of this." David nodded. "Frame it. Top row. Eye level." Malcolm entered a minute later, carrying a tablet. "The codebase update is finished. Version 2.0 launches tonight. Full transparency, shared authorship, and an optional read-only log of who wrote each piece." David raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that last part? People will see every line tied to a name." "I'm sure," Malcolm said. "No more hiding behind the system." David gave him a look, one that didn't carry praise, but something more useful. "Trust." "And the board?" They signed off. Malcolm replied. Even the cautious ones. Because they believe in it? No, Malcolm said with a smirk. Because they saw the numbers. Donations are up. Shareholder support has tripled since the announcement. You told the truth, David. Turns out people like that. David chuckled. Go figure. Later that afternoon, Maya followed David into the garage. He had asked her to come out for a surprise. She hesitated when he pulled a large canvas cover off a dusty corner shape. Underneath was a bicycle, old, dented, with one handlebar grip frayed and the seat slightly torn. But its frame had been cleaned, its tires replaced, and the paint touched up. Her jaw dropped slightly. That's mine. You left it behind at the shelter. I made some calls, David said. Took a few favors to get it back. She walked over to it slowly, trailing her fingers along the bar. How did you even know? The staff there remembered you, he said. They said the girl who yelled at people not to die left behind a bike no one else dared to ride. She smiled, and this time, it reached every part of her face. You fixed it? I cleaned it. You fix it. That's how this works now. They wheeled the bike out into the driveway and spent the next hour replacing the chain and tightening the brakes. David let her take the lead, watching as she got oil on her sleeves and dirt under her fingernails without complaint. Have you ever ridden it around here? She asked suddenly. Not yet. Well, you should, Maya said, straddling the bike. This road's nice. It doesn't pretend to be perfect. You feel every bump. David crossed his arms. Is that a good thing? It is when you've spent most of your life pretending not to feel anything. That night, they had dinner with Raphael, Malcolm, and Elaine on the back patio. No suits, no laptops, just grilled chicken, sweet corn, and glasses of iced tea that never seemed to empty. Elaine raised a glass halfway through the meal. To the people who spoke up, she said, even when no one listened. To the people who finally did, Malcolm added. They clinked glasses gently, no toasts shouted, just nods, small smiles, and long looks that said more than words ever could. After dinner, Maya pulled David aside. I want to go back, she said. He blinked. Back where? To the shelter. Just for a visit, she clarified. There's this girl there, Naomi. She always talked about building things, like actually building wood, metal, old things people throw out. She never got her chance. David hesitated. You want to take her a message? I want to take her a toolbox, Maya said, and a promise. He smiled slowly. Then we'll go tomorrow. The next morning, they did. Naomi was smaller than Maya remembered, but no less bold. Her eyes lit up when she saw the silver toolbox David had brought, and she gripped it like it was made of gold. Maya spent nearly an hour sitting with the other kids, telling them about the house, the pasta, the lake, and the night she screamed at a billionaire not to open a door. The kids laughed, not because it was funny, but because they didn't expect the story to end with, and now he's my best friend. When they left, Naomi stood on the sidewalk holding the box like it was a gift from another planet. David looked back once before getting into the SUV. He saw her mouth the words thank you, and then turned back toward the building with her chin up, like someone ready to build a future no one had drafted for her. As they drove back, Maya leaned against the window, quiet for a while. You think people change? She asked softly. David didn't answer right away. He thought about Malcolm, Raphael, Lena, Elaine, about himself. I don't know if people change, he said finally, but I think they remember who they were meant to be. Maya nodded. I think you remembered. Back at the house, she asked to sleep in the main guest room for the first Timino, the one by the hallway where she had first stayed, but the larger one at the end, with the view of the lake. He helped her move her books, her yellow hat, her photo of Naomi holding the toolbox. She stood in the doorway after everything was placed, then looked up at him. You gonna be okay out here without me? He smiled. Barely. She nodded and closed the door. That night, the wind carried the scent of pine and old rain. David sat on the back porch, staring at the water, thinking of the door, the one she'd warned him not to open. He had opened it anyway, but only after listening, only after pausing, and what waited on the other side wasn't destruction. It was everything he had forgotten he needed, and everyone he never knew he'd needed to become. The morning sun bled gently through the tall windows of the legacy room, bathing the artifacts in a soft golden light. David Monroe stood motionless for a while, letting the silence settle, absorbing its weight. It was a rare kind of silence, the kind that didn't ache, the kind that came after storm winds had passed. He was holding a photo in his hand, one Maya had tucked into the display case late the night before. It was a faded image of her younger self, no more than 7, seated on the curb in front of a fast food restaurant, wearing clothes 2 sizes too large, and clinging to a plastic cup with both hands. Her eyes were alert, already cautious, already brave. The note scribbled on the back in childish handwriting said, "Still here." He set the photo back and exhaled, then walked through the hallway toward the kitchen, where the smell of eggs and toast greeted him. Maya sat at the counter, barefoot, wearing one of his old button-down shirts over her jeans like a robe. She was humming something tuneless but calm. On the table beside her, the toolbox they'd gifted Naomi was now open and filled with new items, donations from staff, neighbors, even old employees who had seen the story online and wanted to help. "You're making breakfast now?" David teased as he leaned against the doorframe. She glanced up, unimpressed. "I make better eggs than you, and you know it." He held up his hands in surrender. "Fair." They ate in companionable quiet, interrupted only by Maya turning the radio dial until she found a song she liked. A few minutes in, her expression shifted. She lowered the volume. "There's going to be backlash," she said, looking him in the eye. David paused, fork midair. "About what?" "About you. About me. About how we're doing this." He set the fork down. "We've already faced most of it. That was before we started rebuilding," she said. "Now people think it's about profit again, like you're using the story for sympathy. And what do you think?" Maya didn't hesitate. "I think it's okay to care about the truth and still want to win." David nodded slowly. "Then let's keep winning." That afternoon, Raphael brought a folder into David's study. He looked unusually tense. "It's about the Thompson account," Raphael said, placing the folder gently on the desk. "You're not going to like it." David opened it. Inside were scanned emails, receipts, and internal memos going back years, most of them from during Lawrence's tenure. A pattern emerged quickly. The Thompson account had been siphoning funds through dummy subcontractors. Hundreds of thousands quietly bled out, masked in software licensing fees and regional consulting payments. "And you're sure about these?" David asked. "I triple-checked. Maya's the one who flagged the inconsistencies last week. I thought it was minor until I dug deeper." David sat back. "If this goes public," Raphael finished for him, "it could ruin the legacy of the company even now." David closed the folder. "Then we bring it forward ourselves." Raphael blinked. "You're serious?" David nodded. "No more shadows. We announce it. We show what happened. We tell the truth." That evening, in a hastily organized press release, Monroe Innovations acknowledged the internal financial misconduct, placing responsibility on the prior administration and revealing that a full audit had been initiated. David's public statement was firm but measured, ending with the line, "Justice is not about avoiding discomfort, it's about confronting it." The media response was immediate and polarized. Some praised the transparency. Others accused him of distraction tactics. A few called for his resignation. But among the noise, a new voice rose. Maya's. She published a letter to the public on her personal blog titled, "From the Outside In." It began, "When I was 11, I thought the most powerful thing in the world was silence, because that's what kept people like me invisible. I don't think that anymore. Now I know the most powerful thing in the world is being heard." Her letter went viral within hours. The next day, David arrived at headquarters to find a small crowd gathered outside the gates. Not protesters, supporters. People holding signs that said things like, "Tell the truth, build again," and "I was homeless too." Maya met him in the lobby. Her face was flushed from emotion but steady. "They're not just here for you," she said. "They're here because they believe in second chances." He gave her a long look, then nodded. "Let's give them one." In the weeks that followed, Monroe Innovations launched a new mentorship initiative for underprivileged youth interested in engineering, software, or entrepreneurship. They called it Legacy Builders. Maya was one of the first speakers. She stood before a group of 20 young people in the same conference room that had once been the scene of corporate betrayal. She wore jeans and a t-shirt that read, "Still Here." Her hair was braided tightly, her eyes clear. "I wasn't supposed to be here," she told them. But someone listened. That's all it takes, sometimes one person, one pause, one moment of what if they're right. David watched from the back, unnoticed, his heart full, in a way that couldn't be explained to balance sheets or executive summaries. What Maya gave them couldn't be taught. It had to be lived. After the session, one of the students approached him, a lanky boy with nervous hands. "Sir," he said, "she said you used to be the CEO. I still am," David replied. The boy blinked. "But you let her run this part." David smiled. "That's because she's better at it than I am." The boy nodded, as if that made perfect sense. That night, David found himself wandering back to the legacy room. The lights were dimmed, but a single lamp illuminated the corner where Maya's clipping still sat. He pulled a chair up and sat quietly for a long while. Then, reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a small square of folded paper. It was a Notea copy of one Maya had once written to herself but never showed him. He had found it crumpled in the bottom of her old backpack. It read, "If nobody believes me, I'll believe myself louder." He smiled and tucked the note into the frame beside the newspaper clipping. From the hallway, Maya's voice called, "You coming to dinner?" "In a minute," he answered. But he didn't move. He just sat there, letting the words wash over him, letting the weight of the past settle into place, not to haunt him, but to hold him upright. The world hadn't changed overnight, but one girl had screamed, "Don't open that door." And because of her, he had learned to knock first. It had rained the night before, the kind of slow, steady rain that softened the air and made the pavement smell like memory. David Monroe stepped out of his black SUV and glanced toward the old building at the edge of the city, once a halfway house, now a shelter in the early stages of renovation. It had been Maya's idea. Again, she'd called it the Restart House. He called it Redemption. As he walked across the gravel lot, he heard the sound of hammers inside, the voices of volunteers laughing, and someone singing an old Motown tune. It was imperfect, but it was alive. Inside, Maya stood with her sleeves rolled up, painting a wall with a group of teenagers. One of them had earbuds in and barely looked up when David approached. "We're going with that shade?" he teased, raising an eyebrow at the bold orange color. "It's optimistic," Maya said, not turning around. David laughed. "It's loud. Hope usually is." They stood there in quiet agreement for a moment before Maya nodded toward a dusty filing cabinet tucked in the corner. "Found something earlier. Thought you should see it." David crossed the room, wiped the dust off the top drawer, and tugged it open. Inside, beneath layers of old invoices and records, was a manila envelope with his name written on either's full name, in the handwriting of Lawrence Davenport. His jaw tightened. He pulled it out carefully and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a USB drive. The letter was short. A confession. Lawrence had written it shortly after Maya had been kicked out of the office that day. It said he'd known what was going on in the house, the tampered security, the infiltration, but hadn't intervened. He had suspected someone inside the company had been planning to sell trade secrets, but he let it happen. Out of greed, out of fear, out of bitterness toward David's success. David's hands trembled slightly as he finished reading. "I thought it might be some kind of insurance," Maya said quietly, standing beside him now. "It's more than that," he said. "It's guilt, finally written down." She nodded. "Do we release it?" David stared at the paper. "Yes, but on our terms." Later that week, Monroe Innovations released a formal statement, revealing Lawrence's confession and the evidence that had been recovered. It caused a media frenzy. Old enemies resurfaced. Anonymous insiders began whispering to the press. And yet, something remarkable happened. The company's stock didn't drop. The backlash that had been feared never materialized. Because the public had already seen, the worst, and had seen someone choose truth over silence. People rallied. Investors who had previously backed away now reached out with quiet respect. Meanwhile, Maya was invited to speak at a national education forum in D.C. about youth advocacy, tech ethics, and rebuilding trust. She hesitated at first. "I'm not polished," she told David. "I'm not some Ivy League prodigy." "No," he said. "You're better. You've lived through it." When she took the stage a week later, the lights were harsh and the room was packed. But Maya's voice was calm. "I used to think I was only valuable if I was quiet, grateful, small. But I was wrong. We're allowed to take up space. We're allowed to demand better." and we're allowed to survive in ways that make people uncomfortable." And the audience rose in standing ovation. Back at Monroe Innovations, David received a phone call he never expected. It was from an old friend, Senator Alan Cooper, now chairing a bipartisan ethics committee. He wanted David to testify about corporate governance, whistleblower protections, and how a private company had voluntarily exposed its own corruption. "Me?" David asked, baffled. "You," the senator said, "because you listened to a girl no one else would." That night, David returned home and stood by the bookshelf in his study. He pulled down a leather-bound notebook where he kept things he didn't want to forget: clippings, quotes, scribbled notes from his late wife, and a small yellowed post-it that read, "Believe the unlikely." He stared at it for a long time. Just then, Maya walked in, holding a stack of papers. "There's something you need to see." What is it?" "A background check we ran on one of the former IT contractors who worked on the security systems years ago." David took the papers and scanned them. His heart froze. The name matched one that had appeared in Lawrence's letter, a consultant they'd hired through a third-party firm, someone no one had thought to vet closely. And the background revealed a sealed court record, a history of corporate sabotage. "We missed this?" David muttered. "No," Maya said. "He wanted us to miss it." "What do we do now?" She looked him square in the eye. "We find him. We find out how deep this went." David exhaled, long and slow. "We're not done, are we?" She shook her head. "Not even close." They spent the next few days working with Raphael, combing through logs, communications, and system patches from years ago. Slowly, a pattern emerged, a network of digital breadcrumbs pointing to a coordinated effort to compromise not just Monroe Innovations, but multiple companies in the Midwest tech corridor. It was industrial espionage on a scale far beyond what they had imagined. In the middle of it all, Maya found herself in her old neighborhood. She'd come to speak with an old woman named Mrs. Clara, who'd once let her sleep on her porch when it got too cold. Clara greeted her with a warm hug and tears in her eyes. "You made it," she whispered. "I did," Maya said, her voice cracking. They sat on the porch for an hour, drinking sweet tea and talking about the past. Maya asked Clara if she remembered anything unusual during those weeks, strangers in the neighborhood. Vans parked too long, people asking questions. Clara's memory was sharp. There was a man in a gray suit, always watching that old tech building down the street. Said he was from the city, but never showed no badge. Maya made a note. That night, she called David. "I think we found our ghost," she said. The lead took them to an old business address long since abandoned. But inside, they found server racks still warm, log files still running, and cameras, so many cameras. Maya scrolled through the feeds and found archived footage of herself as a child, standing in front of Monroe headquarters, a child they had tracked for years. David stood behind her. "They were watching you." "No," Maya said softly. "They were watching who might trust me." The implications were staggering. "They thought you were a liability," David said. "They were right," Maya said, her voice fierce. "I'm a liability to liars." As they stood in the glow of the monitors, David placed a hand on her shoulder. "We end this," he said. "Together," Maya replied. And in that moment, two survivors, sown once silenced by power, the other blinded by it, stood side by side, ready to bring down the final curtain on the web of shadows. Because when the system failed them, they built a truth too strong to erase. It was just after midnight when the final piece fell into place. David sat alone in the conference room, the city glittering outside the floor-to-ceiling windows like 1,000 waiting answers. On the table before him were 3 phones, each tied to a different investigative agency. One with the FBI's Special Cyber Crimes Unit, one with a private journalist from the Washington Ledger, and the last, a direct line to a small tech watchdog group that Maya had quietly helped establish after their ordeal began. In the silence, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the last file Maya had uncovered, an internal memo from years ago, signed by 3 board members who had long since stepped down. The memo authorized the use of behavioral tracking on unverified employees and suggested strategic blacklisting of individuals deemed a threat to shareholder confidence. Maya's name was underlined. David stared at it for a long time. Then, slowly, he picked up the first phone. By dawn, subpoenas had been issued. At 7:30 a.m., News vans began lining the block in front of Monroe Innovations. By 9 o'clock, the Department of Justice issued a formal statement naming the former board members in a federal investigation. And at 9:45, as Maya and David walked side by side through the lobby now free of the oppressive surveillance and quiet hostility that once poisoned the air, very employee on the floor stood and applauded. Not out of obligation, but out of something deeper. Recognition, gratitude. Raphael met them at the elevator with a USB stick in his hand and a grin that stretched to his eyes. Everything's backed up. Every chat, every leak trail, every buried directive. We've got a forensic timeline from start to finish. Maya raised her eyebrows. Even the offshore accounts? Especially the offshore accounts. David looked to her. You ready? I've been ready since I saw the cameras in your hallway, she said. They entered the boardroom together, not as a CEO and a girl from the streets, but as partners in truth. Seated around the table were interim executives, compliance officers, and a single DOJ representative. The atmosphere was no longer adversarial. It was anticipatory. David opened the meeting with a simple sentence. We're not here to cover tracks. We're here to clean house. He clicked the remote, and the screens lit up with graphs, faces, code lines, and money trails. Maya did most of the speaking. Her voice never wavered. This wasn't just a betrayal of corporate trust, she said. It was a systemic targeting of vulnerable individuals, those without pedigree, without protection, and without privilege. I was never supposed to be seen, but I was, and now, I won't be unseen again. There was silence after she spoke. Then the DOJ official cleared his throat and said quietly, I hope you know how rare this is, a company choosing to stand up from within. David replied, it wasn't the company, it was the people. People like her. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low, David and Maya returned to the small shelter, the Restart House. The volunteers had finished for the day. The smell of fresh paint still lingered in the air. Outside, a group of kids played basketball with a bent rim and a cracked sidewalk. But they were laughing, and it was enough. Inside, David handed Maya a manila envelope of his own. What's this? She asked. Your future, he said. Full scholarship. Wherever you want to go, Mid or Stanford. Or not college at a lift, that's what you choose. It's yours. She opened the envelope, eyes widening. This is too much. No, he said. This is just enough. You didn't save this company to end up limited by it. She blinked back tears and looked down at the old hardwood floor, then up again. Can I stay a little while longer? Stay as long as you want, he said. This place, this missionite, was never just about buildings or stock prices. It was about people who were always overlooked. That night, Maya walked through the empty halls of the shelter alone, hands trailing along the freshly painted walls. She paused in the old library, now cleaned and stacked with donated books. There, on the windowsill, sat a weathered photo-Framian image of her mother, smiling in front of a diner, holding a newborn Maya in her arms. I made it, Mama, she whispered, and I'm not done yet. The next morning, David met with the last person on his list, Senator Cooper. They stood on the steps of the state capitol, the sun casting long shadows behind them. We're drafting new legislation, the senator said. Whistleblower protections in tech startups, mandatory transparency on internal surveillance practices, and federal funding for ethical innovation initiatives. And you want me to? I want you to help us build it, the senator said. You've seen the best and the worst. That makes you valuable. David nodded. I'll do it, but only if Maya's involved too. She's already on the advisory panel. He smiled. Of course she is. The story reached national headlines within the week. Teen exposes corporate espionage ring. CEO backs her. Congress listens. But for David and Maya, it wasn't about the press. It wasn't even about the justice that came. It was about the message. That every voice matters. That silence is not safety. And that even when the odds are stacked, and the system seems immovable, change is possible. Sometimes, all it takes is someone whispering, "Don't open that door," and someone else brave enough to listen.